right, cool, it's working. I'm not going to rap, don't worry. I have no rapping skills. But what I want to talk to you guys about today is what do you do with usability study findings? So you run your tests, you document your issues. I could go on and on about how to write notes and how to facilitate, but that's not what we're going to focus on today. We're going to focus on how do you turn that into actionable items, whether it's stories, if you're in an agile process, requirements, et cetera. How do you figure out what items to work on and in what order? So just briefly, as of 2 months ago, I stopped commuting from DC to Reston, and I commute from my bedroom to my other bedroom to work from home for a company called ServiceNow. We are a service automation company that automates everything from IT processes to finance and HR processes. So our big thing now is XaaS, everything as a service. I'm not sure where the X comes from, but I'm not on the marketing team. So I hang out with that guy a lot. That's my 6-year-old dachshund, Cody. And he really likes Devil's Backbone Vienna Lager. He actually was drinking somebody's beer at the dog park today, which is kind of funny. As I said earlier, we're hiring. I made fun little short links here. So Snux jobs for ServiceNow UX job. I have my business cards up here if you want to email me about it. But my team is within the pre-sales organization, which is a really interesting place for UX. But we get to build a lot of really fun prototypes with not a lot of constraints. It's actually a really fun place to do user research, usability testing, and front-end development because you get to play with a lot of really cool technology on our platform. So hit me up later, grab my business card, go there. So what are we going to talk about? So it's really cool to put together a beautiful usability study report, whether you do it in PowerPoint or you do it in Adobe Illustrator, which my friends at Sapient do, which is beautiful. But you really need to be able to turn all that information into work. It's no point in running a study if you don't actually make your product better. So our goal is a better user interface, a better user experience, et cetera. So we need to make sure that we're translating those findings into something useful. So where do we begin? Not gonna lie, a lot of this is beg, borrow, and stolen from other people. Jeff Soro at measuringusability.com was a huge influence, as well as the guys over at User Focus in the UK. So you'll see some reference to material from those guys as we go through my slides. So one of the things that when I first started running usability testing 7, 8 years ago, that would happen is we would go through our list of issues and each person would have a very different interpretation of how severe the issue was, how important it was. Especially when you run 5 to 6 sessions and somebody might only be at 1 or 2 of them. They might have been at the one session where the technology wasn't working or the person was just really grumpy. So they were really frustrated by an issue, but none of the other participants even encountered the issue. So at that point, the usability severity ranking, which we found very important, and I'll go into more detail as we go further in the presentation, was very subjective. Another example is if you're not a good note taker and you're the facilitator, so you're busy focused on the individual participant, is you tend to remember certain behaviors that stand out, not the collective or average experience of all the users. So it's really good to have a model to think about how all of the issues and all of the instances of those issues actually impact the reality of that issue happening in production. So there's a lot of really great examples out there of how to rank issues. This is from one article I pulled up for measuring usability, and here you have 6 different models. And a couple things vary between these models. Some of them that come from more of an engineering background, like Chauncey's here, focus really on data loss, right? Number 1, error level 1 is catastrophic error causing irrevocable loss of data or damage. That sounds really scary, but it doesn't talk about the user at all. It talks about the data. It's a very systems-focused model. Joe Dumas's model, Joe and Ginny's model focuses on task completion. Again, this one's starting to get more connected to what the user is thinking. Their goal is to complete some task, pay a bill on a website, purchase something on Amazon, et cetera. But it doesn't talk about how it may affect them emotionally or their perception of the brand. In addition, these models also, some of them switch what is a severe level. So in Chauncey's, 1 is the worst. In Nielsen's, 4 is the worst. And there's a psychology behind how people perceive levels of severity. And so most of these models tend to trend toward the higher the number, the worse the issue is. And it just becomes a sorting game when you're dealing with it in Excel. What I like about Jeff's, and Jeff's is closest to the model that I started to use and will go into today, is it covers the impact to the user. So talks about hesitation or irritation and talks about task failure. But it doesn't, what it's missing, and what I'll go into shortly, is what's the business or impact to the user in real terms? Is it lost revenue? Is it an important task that the user wanted to complete? Or is it something that's maybe of side value, like customizing the color of a website that's your banking website, right? That's not really important. Paying your bill and making sure you have a positive balance is really important. So thinking about how that factors into how you rate your issues, we started to think, and I think is very important in how you rate it. And none of these issues really none of these models really factor that in. So what I was really excited about, so I gave this presentation in DC in July, and I found some picture of these red routes, which I'll explain in a minute, on Google Images. But then I was in London in October, and I actually saw the sign, so I was able to validate that these are a real thing. So let's explain what red routes are. So red routes are a technique, if you've ever been to London or you know about London, it's probably one of the most congested traffic cities in the country, and they've done in the world, and they've done a lot of different things to abate a lot of the congestion issues. There's congestion taxes, so to drive in certain parts of the city, you have to pay a premium. One of the other things they did is they've declared certain routes on roads red routes, and what that means is you can never park your car on those roads. You can never stop your car on those roads. And what's amazing, and the reason for that is to allow buses more free flow through traffic on those roads. They're major arteries for bus traffic, and London is a heavy public transportation city, so that's really important. So focusing on these red routes and improving how those red routes are designed and how cars navigate those roads has actually improved bus journeys to be 10% faster and 27% more reliable. That means that if you're waiting for your bus and it's supposed to come at 10:06, 27% more likely to come at 10:06 when it's a bus that uses the red routes. Also, because of the reduction in traffic and cars parked and causing people to have to merge, about a 6% reduction in accidents on those roads as well. So the same idea applies to websites. We talked about on, for example, a banking website, paying a bill being one of the most important things you do. So what the guys at UserFocus started to talk about is they started to use this concept of red routes to how to do a task analysis of the product, site, or app you're testing, to focus on those during usability testing and focus on those issues as any issues that occur on those red routes as the most important issues. So there are a couple of ways in which we define those red routes. So they're the most important tasks in your system. They typically occur over many pages. It's not like select an item from a drop-down. It's the full bill pay process. Selecting your biller, choosing a due date, putting in the amount, confirming it, following up to make sure that it was actually processed. The whole end-to-end experience of making sure your bill got paid and you're not charged a late fee. So it's a longer scale, more longitudinal experience than just an interaction with a single page. They also should focus on key business objectives of your product. So if you're a retail site, obviously it should be focused on sales. But if you're working on a project where you're trying to cross-sell additional items, it should be focused on how effective are those cross-sales, the interaction with cross-selling. So you bought a TV, did you also buy a TV stand? That might be really important if you're trying to round out your sales that way. In addition, it should be focused on the customer's objectives. Why are they coming to your product? What are they trying to do? So it's something important to do before you actually run your usability study is identify of the tasks you're testing during your session, what are the most important ones and how do you define success along those tasks? So what does that do? So that gives us a model that builds out into this nice flow chart that allows us to factor in 3 key questions in analyzing each issue. And why this is important, it starts to make the analysis of your usability issues much more objective. And so the model I started to use is these 3 questions. So does the problem occur in a red route? So did the user have trouble finding the submit button during the bill pay process? Or do they have trouble finding the submit button during the change the color of your background process? Where was it? is a problem difficult to overcome? So of the 3 questions, I have to admit this one still does allow for some subjectivity. One of my coworkers when I was in insurance used to use how long did it take the user to overcome the issue? And that's a good model. So were they able, so I look at it this way, were they able to overcome the issue at all? Did they ask for help? Did they give up? So those are 3 things I look at. So do they turn to the facilitator and say, hey, I don't know what to do. Can you tell me what to do? And even after redirecting, hey, I'm just here to observe. Can you please try? And how would you do this if you were home? If they continue, it's a very easy yes. If they have any sort of body language or verbal emotion that expresses frustration, they slam their mouse on the desk. If they're that emotional about a usability study, which I don't see that often, or they just say, I just give up at this point. I hate technology. Those are also clear indicators. So that's the second one. And then the third one I look at, is the problem persistent? Because with limited budget and limited time, we want to focus on the issues that are going to have the most bang for our buck if we fix them. And so the way I look at this is, if you tested with 5 users, did 3 people have it, or did 3 people encounter the issue, or did 2? If it was 2 people, this is a no. If it's 3 people, it was a yes. Basically, having 3 questions draws out 4 different levels of issues. So you go from low, being, we saw this issue, it wasn't difficult to overcome, it was not on a critical path, and only 1 or 2 users of the 5 encountered it, it's a low. All the way to, yes, this was the bill pay task, everybody walked away from the computer, and 3 of the 5 people encountered it, that's our most critical issue. So those are the 3 questions that I ask myself, and I'll show you some tools to track this stuff at the end of the presentation. Those are the ways in which I manage to analyze our issues. There's a second piece of this that's really important, though. And I want to go into that for a second. So you would think, coming out of that slide, it's very intuitive. Let's just start with the critical ones first. Again, if you're in an organization that isn't throwing all their money at UX, or there are other projects that are taking budget, time, resources, et cetera, you still need to continue, I believe, with a second step of prioritization. And this is where, as a UX person, having an understanding of development or having a really good partnership with development is really important. Because not only do you want to get, as we talked about, a severity ranking, but I also like to get a complexity ranking. And this has to come from, to me, it has to come from somebody that has more technical expertise. How hard or easy is this going to be to implement? And now that we have these 2 things, this is almost like if you've ever done risk analysis. How severe is this risk? How likely is this risk to occur? It just becomes simple math about which issues you want to focus on. So you end up in a matrix here, right? So if it's a critical severity issue and really easy to implement, it's low-hanging fruit. It's a no-brainer. But if it's low severity, again, not a critical path, a couple of your users encountered it and they weren't that frustrated, but it'd be really hard to fix, it's probably not the best use of your time, attention, et cetera. And then there's obviously everything in the middle: high severity, high complexity, medium severity, medium complexity, right? You start to hedge on those. But the green quadrant, the upper left corner, is where you want to start working from. And I've always have found that really effective as a tool to communicate with your product owner, your technical leads, whomever you have to negotiate with to get your stories to the top of the backlog. So I've built 2 tools as a way to manage this. One I finished an hour ago, so it's going to be a little buggy. But the other is a very old school, non-web-based manner. And these links are public. This website's not live yet, but I'll show you the demo on my machine. And then the first link is just a public Dropbox of an Excel template. And this will be up on SlideShare tonight, so we can tweet that out after the session. Oh, it is right here. Let me just switch gears for a second. I'll show you the Excel spreadsheet. And we'll talk about what's going on. So I've built this in a template. I'd be curious to see people's experience with using it. But basically the way it works is under the participants column, that's the first place I start. I'm going to create a column for each participant that's in my study. Now, one thing to keep in mind that I've seen is just because you have 5 people in your study, sometimes a person never gets to a certain task or scenario. So I do have this extra column G where I ask how many people could have potentially encountered this issue. And the reason for that, like I said, is there might be a scenario where there's an issue when people pay with a credit card, but the same issue couldn't happen when somebody pays with a debit card. And so therefore, if 4 of your people are credit card people and 1 isn't, it's probably something you should have figured out in your screener, but that's okay. I use this column G here to hedge on that. And what happens is basically, as you track each issue, and the reason I have this type column is because when I have non-UX people actually anybody really as an observer, they all tend to document bugs and recommendations in this spreadsheet as well. So I just put that column A in there as a filter. So if they capture a bug that's technical in nature or a recommendation of a new idea, just put bug or recommendation in column A, use filters, and you're good to go. Comment is the issue, document the issue. What were they trying to do? What was the problem they encountered, and what did it prevent them from doing? So there's a couple really good articles that I can never find that I read a couple years ago on human factors about how to write a good issue and how to write a good recommendation. If anybody finds them, you can tweet them to me. Location is where in the site. And some issues are global in nature. So if it's an issue with something like navigation, that affects your entire website. So I would put global or nav in there. But if it's something only on a specific step of the process or a specific page, this is another tool to document that. We use, and then I'll put a 1 in each column for any participant that encountered that issue. That helps me automatically calculate the 50%. Maybe this is a little too nerdy. You could just be smart and put yes or no here. That's fine if you want to change it. Then you also put a 1 in here for difficult and a 1 if it was on the red route. And the severity column just updates automatically. And if you want to keep maintaining this tool, you can put your recommendation in here. I've done examples where I even track status and who the ticket is assigned to. So if an issue turns into a recommendation, which turns into a story in Jira or whatever tool you might be using, you could actually build a spreadsheet out or build something like this out that tracks all that information if you want to report on this as a KPI or something for your team. But then you just keep going down. You just keep adding rows to the spreadsheet and tracking it. And then you sort. And I'll use this as a tool to present my findings. Typically after I present more of the PowerPoint style presentation where I show them where in the usability test the issues actually happen. This will be something I distribute at the end as a way to see the number of critical issues, et cetera, as the artifact that comes out of that presentation. So what I started working on, and I would love for people to play with this and get feedback on, is I started building a web-based version of this. And this is why if you guys use Angular and Parse or other frameworks, I started this at 10 o'clock last night, and I already built something. It's really easy using these tools to do stuff. So the idea here is that, watch it not work today. That'd be awesome. So you have a list of your projects, and you can go ahead and create new projects here. It's really simple and ugly right now. And then you can go into your project and do the same thing you do in the Excel spreadsheet. Track your description. The user couldn't figure out how to select a due date. I'm not mirroring, so bear with me if I have typos. And then you answer the 3 questions here. I didn't bother doing the whole participant tracking here. Then you click Add Issue. And then it calculates the severity for you. I'm using just numbers here right now. But you can always come back to this later. What is this, sample project? They're all called sample project. Great. Well, it's still there. So it's working. That's a good sign. Okay. And it's just, right now, the way this is built, just in the interest of time, I haven't thought a lot about sharing or having multiple contributors to it. Right now, you create a user account, you log in, this is yours. You can see it, you can't really share it yet, but we'll get there, or I'll get there in my spare time. But the idea here is now it's a digital way to track it, and once you can share it and invite collaborators, it becomes a public repository for the work you're doing. And if you've ever read Krug's book, Don't Make Me Think, and Rocket Surgery Made Easy, the publicity of UX is really important. He talks about doing, was it like user testing Friday or whatever, and how valuable that is. This is just another tool to show what you're doing. And I could imagine this, if you wanted to get crazy and you had a big UX team, you could start tracking which issues, how many issues got resolved. I started to think about if you do something like a system usability scale or you do net promoter score, how you can tie these things together and track over time. Well, at the beginning, we ran our first usability study. We had 30 issues and an NPS of 9 and a SUS of 42. I think that's like the lowest you can get. But then we fixed 20 of those issues, and now here's the SUS and the NPS afterwards, and it's so much better. It's a NPS of 50 and a SUS of 78, which is like a B- if you want to give it a letter grade. So this could get really big. I've just focused on tracking the issues because for my purposes right now and the team and the way we work, we just need a way to figure out what do we need to fix because we're working in like 1-week cycles. So that's what I've built. UXissues.com is just a sign-up form right now. I'll let you know when it's live, but you could go, it's not even .com. I tried to be funny, like Bitly. It's uxissue.es, but that confuses a lot of people, so I might buy .com. But you guys can take a picture and remember it, so I think you guys will be okay. But the last time I presented that, somebody got really confused, which means it's a usability issue of critical severity. Yeah, so that's my story, guys. We'll go back to Mr. Jay-Z, if I can find him. Let's see, we go here, and we go here. So I just picked this because he had a really funny face, like he was asking questions. You guys have questions? We have 10 minutes. How are we doing, Jim? We good on time? My timer I set up was 30 hours instead of 30 minutes, so it's not that helpful. Yeah.
Do you have an example of an actual test you've done with a lot of data there? Where we can see a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to switch to dual screen. It'll make my life easier. If I can remember the keyboard command. So this is a study we ran. It's my first usability study at ServiceNow. But it was like, I think it ended up being about 43 issues. So you see, and I've cleaned it up a little since then, or maybe made it worse, but I have row 1 is all filtered. So if you wanted to look at a specific page or only critical severity, I think right now it's sorted by severity and then location, or maybe location and then severity, something like that. But you can see all the issues that were global, both of them happen to be critical. And then the solution form was a form in our product to submit information, a lot of critical issues. And I got all the way to recommendation. And as my team went through this and we decided what we were going to work on, we started to say, we need a story for this or not. And then we were able to delegate out the work from there. So this is, and you'll see in here, if I scroll down, I see a question back there. I'll come to you in a second. There's bugs in here. This thing, I click on this button, it opens a new tab. That wasn't supposed to happen. We go through this list a little longer. They want to see more org chart data. Great, cool, we can do that. So we track that. But then I would filter this out if I was just doing usability counts. Like if I wanted to say how many issues there were, I wouldn't count row 41. It's not an issue, it's an idea. So this is an example. And you can get crazy and start color coding it if you want to just blow your eyeballs out. I think I had colors in here and then it was really hard to read. But yeah, this is an example of one that we used recently. Is that what you wanted to see? Is that helpful?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. One of the teams I work with is using something similar to this. The team I'm working with is using something somewhat different, but this is nice because it's filterable and sortable.
And I think, given my 2 months of experience with ServiceNow, I think I could actually build this on our software platform, and that might be my next challenge. There's a question back here.
Given this document you've got here, I mean, in your organization, does Deb see this, or is this strictly for your?
So my team is everything. So I am a developer and I'm the usability researcher because we're 4 people. But let me go back to Travelers when I was in a huge organization, and it was a very different. We would meet with the tech leadership, so the most senior development lead on an Agile team, and go through this after a usability study and do that whole complexity thing. And there'd just be another column. You know, what I don't have in the template, and I'll update this tonight maybe, depends on how many beer I have, is a complexity column. So this is the phase one, really, because this just captures severity. What it's missing is the technical answer that we talked about around complexity. But absolutely, because we need their input. And one of the things you often need to do the technical part is some idea of a recommendation. Maybe a sentence, maybe not a sketch mock-up or some type of prototype, but something as a tool to help the developers put a number on it. And I'm looking for similar severity, like 1 through 4, not 12 days, right? Just really high level. Over here?
Simple question. What do you mean by create story, yes, no, and maybe some more information?
So I was just trying to assign work. Create story, meaning create a new ticket in our system. So we're an agile team. So stories drive our work. So we had to decide if we were going to work on this issue based on our severity ranking, did somebody have to go create a story in our system to go work and assign it out? And then the next one is who is going to do that. That's all that was. So another question over here.
I feel like it's pretty different from your previous gig at Travelers. You have to do any research to figure out what that critical path was for kind of rather esoteric.
And it's even more different than when I was in ad tech for the past year. I've kind of been all over the place. So what my team is doing at ServiceNow, I'm not on a product team. So we're not responsible for the UX of the ServiceNow platform. We're responsible for the UX of implementations of the ServiceNow platform to solve different business needs. So just like in insurance, there's a workflow to selling an insurance policy. I'm more interested in how we leverage ServiceNow to implement those workflows. So those workflows often define the red routes. Does that answer your question?
Sure.
If we were, you're right. If I was responsible for the UX of our platform, I think it'd be a very different. And I have to learn how my users would be ITIL developers, I guess, people that were developing on our platform, not consumers in HR and new hires and things like that. Over here?
So all of this is used to help you prioritize when you get out of your really testing and research. But then when you have to prioritize those enhancements alongside other business-driven enhancements or just other work that the same developers are doing, do you usually use kind of a similar model that you can align those? And or maybe most of you guys work in, you're either doing enhancements or you're doing.
No, these have to fit in. So at ServiceNow, it's interesting because this is all we care about because we're building concepts. So the UX has to be great. Everything else is like, if it's buggy in IE, we don't care. We'll just only demo it in Chrome. We have a lot of luxuries in that regard. But you're right. Like at Travelers, when I was building our mobile service app to like pay your bill and get your auto ID card and stuff, absolutely we had to fit this in. And what we started to do was treat this priority calculation the same as we would for a new story coming into the backlog. And just like backlog, you assign story points to backlog items instead of using complexity, you would use your story points or whatever technique you might be using. You don't want to, right? You don't want 2 or 6 or 10. It just becomes really unwieldy. Yeah, you want to try and centralize it all. And you might have a tag or something for UX as a way to manage these, depending on what tool you're using. Any more questions? Is that Diet Coke? No, it's a Diet Coke can. Okay. Oh, great. I would love for you guys to try the tool once it's live. I'd love feedback. I'm not planning on monetizing this. It's cool and fun for me to play with this stuff. If it's useful for you guys, please let me know. Feel free to sign up for the mailing list and I'll let you know when it's live. And if you are interested in coming and joining our team at ServiceNow, I'll leave my cards here. We can talk at the end of the session. Jim, we'll turn it over to you. Thanks, guys.
Okay, give us a second here to switch mics and switch laptops and we'll get started. I'm gonna tag team the two. So I'll put it back. Oh, what do you do with a t-shirt? I know, right? It's like, but it only pierced my lip. There we go. Okay. Can you guys hear me okay in the back? Yes? All right. Okay. All right, everybody comfortable? That was a cool talk. It's awesome when we can do like really hands-on stuff you can take and do something cool with the next day. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. My talk will be a little all over the place this evening. I'm gonna cover a bunch of stuff. So first of all, who the heck am I? So I'm Jim Lane. I organized this bad boy here. So I thought I'd talk a little about who I am, just because it'll make a point in a second. So I graduated from Carnegie Mellon. I studied cognitive science there. After there, I went to Boston to go to music school at Berkeley. Ended up at a multimedia place that went to web. Web took me to Silicon Valley. That took me to Netscape. Took me to AOL. To Steve Case's Revolution thing, and ended up here at AddThis, which I say just because one of the really cool things about AddThis, or about UX, is that there's lots of different ways you come to it, and people come to it from all different kinds of disciplines, visual design and human factors and interface stuff or engineering. That's one of the really cool things about the field that we do, but it presents its own challenges. And it's also, by the way, a very small world. If you haven't noticed that already, or you're new to it around here, never burn bridges. It's a very small world, trust me, especially in DC. So let's see. As my day job as a VP or as the organizer for this meetup, I get asked lots of questions about user experience and careers and stuff like that. So I thought I'd share some of those tonight using this presentation kind of as a vehicle. I use this, I show this to all new employees, especially people on my team. I've shown it to the whole company at AddThis. It's a way to talk about what UX is, how our team works, how the organization works, how we collaborate, all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to answer some of the questions I get asked a lot kind of through the process of this. And this is actually an example of communicating user experience to your organization to help them understand how your team works or how you work, and that sort of thing. So to start it off, this is everyone's favorite question. What is UX? Which is kind of a tricky question, especially because a lot of the time what they're really asking are questions like, how do I really communicate UX? And what's the overlap between this? And how do we work together? And what about ROI? And these are really, really hard questions, but they all come back to the difficulty of what the heck UX is. There's tons of diagrams like this all over the internet. This is just one I saw. I kind of like the transparency. But what it really gets across is there's an incredible number of disciplines that contribute to what user experience is. And some of us do some of them, and most of us don't do all of them. Years ago, there was a lot of specialists. Nowadays, it's kind of hip to be the full stack designer. You do it all. You can code and design and deliver and make breakfast and the whole bit, which is really cool. But this makes it really hard to say, well, what the heck is UX, though? Especially in the context of your particular organization, because they're all different. And how we all work together is always kind of sort of different. So I usually start by trying to simplify, because we like to simplify things, right? And so I try to kind of break it down to something very simple, which is we make customers happy. And the nice thing about this idea is that there's a unifying force behind it, right? There's the idea of, sure, as experienced designers, our job is to make an awesome experience for our particular product or brand or whatever it is that we do. But the great thing about this is that most people in your organization somehow are contributing to the user's experience, whether it's marketing or development or design or whatever. Somehow you're all working together to create this experience together. So it's a great way to say, hey, this is what we do every day, whether it's interface or visual design or CSS or whatever. But it's also a great way to say, hey, we're all in this together. We're all contributing to creating great user experiences, which is a great way to build that empathy into the organization and to start and think about customers from the beginning, whether you're doing product requirements or business requirements or UX requirements or testing results or whatever. So I thought this is a really neat opportunity to instill in an organization. If everyone thinks that way, then it's a kind of a communal force. Which is something that's been really important to us at AddThis over the years as we've grown our service, was always thinking about who are our customers and who are their customers, and how do we put them first when it's really, really easy to solve problems for ourselves instead, which is tricky and an easy trap to fall into. So But I thought I'd run through, and this is usually when I talk about some of the things that are really important to us. And what's cool is that we acquired AddThis in 2006. We were called ClearSpring at the time. There was this little tiny 2-person service thing. It was on about 10,000 domains at the time. It's on 15 million now. But when we started working on it, and over the years we've worked on it since I started here in 2008, there were some things that always seemed to be true. And over the years, they really haven't changed, which is good because in theory, the things you believe probably shouldn't change that frequently. First one is everyone's favorite thing, which is simplicity. Which we all love to say, keep it simple. Simple is good, which is true. One of my favorite Einstein quotes, though, and I'm going to mess the quote up, but it goes something like, make everything as simple as possible, but no simpler, which is kind of my favorite way of thinking about it, because you can go too far. I mean, you can go too minimalist, the black screen with the small gray text in the center that says press. It's like, I mean, yeah, sure, it's beautiful. It's not very usable, but beautiful. So this idea of what's the absolute necessary essence to be there and not one thing more, which is a really beautiful idea. And he applied it to amazing theories in mathematics. So I like to think about simple, and I get asked a lot, like not just if simple is important, but why. And that's an interesting question, because then you start to get kind of subjective, like, well, why is simple good? One of the answers I'll sometimes talk about is things I learned back at Carnegie Mellon when we talked about cognitive science and ideas about how we think about things we see. So for instance, this thing called the mere exposure effect. We like things that we recognize more than we like things that we don't recognize. Kind of a simple idea, that's cool. There's also we like things that act the way we expect them to. And not things that act kind of unexpectedly. This idea of cognitive overhead. I don't want to have to think a lot. It's Krug's book, I think, Don't Make Me Think. So we like things that don't make us think a lot, and we don't like things that make us think a lot, think too much. So in a lot of ways, when things are simple, that means I don't have to think a lot. Things kind of work the way I expect them to. And that's good, and that's why it feels good when things are simple, and so I tend to engage more and convert more, and all the things that then become the KPIs that we talk about. So I have to tie those ideas back to why simplicity is important, but this is something that's kind of been at the foundation of what we do. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later because it comes back into play with things like performance and things. Another one is being informed, particularly around data. So AddThis, we see a lot of data. We're on 15 million websites. We see about 4 billion views a day. We saw, I forgot, 1.1 trillion, I think, in the last 12 months views. So tremendous amount of data, which is cool to a point, as long as you can do something interesting with it. But we really, really love working with data. And this is another case where we see like data-driven design. That's always kind of bothered me a little bit because, I mean, it's great to be driven, I guess, but the problem is data can lead you astray. Data can tell you, hey, here's 50 things you could focus on. Data will tell you they're all important. Data won't tell you which one's the most important. Data can lead you off brand. We did a test, this is years ago, back in 2009 or 10, back when our menu used to be 2 columns, this little tool you'd see on the page. And we did a 32-cell multivariate tests, and we tested different link sizes and different colors and backgrounds and drop shadows, and every single possible combination we could think about to see which one worked the best. And the one that worked the best was take the whole thing and make it black. So put this big black box on the page to invite people to share, and it worked really well. I mean, it had double the conversion rate of any other permutation we saw, but it was, at the time, it was completely off-brand. And so it's like, well, that's great, but we're going to choose not to do that, even though the data would say you should do that. So that's why I kind of like the phrase data-informed, is usually the way that I put it, is that it's important to have data, it's important to test, but then you ultimately have to decide as designers and product leads and so on what the right thing to do is. We do a ton. This is our research suite, if you will, I guess. We use GA just like everyone else does to measure things. We use Kissmetrics, everything from session tracking to cohort analysis, ChartMogul for tracking revenue stuff, Crazy Egg. I think we're going to switch to InspectLit, but single page apps, Crazy Egg doesn't do so well with, heat mapping, tracking behavior within a page. We do tons of A/B testing, multivariate testing. Convert's a tool we use. We use it instead of Optimizely because it's a little cheaper, but we might go to Optimizely. It starts to get pricey. Unbalanced is the thing we use for landing pages. Usertesting.com. Anybody use user testing? Yeah, cool. Remote user testing. So send them $40 a person, and like within an hour, you'll get a video back of them doing the thing that you wanted them to do, answering the questions you wanted them to answer. It's really freaking cool and pretty inexpensive. And you can choose what kinds of candidates you want, whether you want them to be experienced or not, or Mac or PC or whatever you like. Google Hangouts. So Will here, my co-organizer, spends a fair amount of time in Google Hangouts doing user interviews and showing interfaces and stuff like that, and asking questions about it and interviewing some of our customers. Great tool, and hey, by the way, it's free. And there's one running right now on air. We're on the internet. Hi, internet. And then finally, SurveyMonkey. It's a great, easy way to ask questions and do surveys. It's pretty inexpensive. This is our suite. Your suite probably looks different. But the really important thing is, and I did a talk about this maybe a year and a half ago, there's no reason not to be doing research. There's so many tools. A lot of them are free. A lot of them are relatively inexpensive. I mean, some of these, like Kissmetrics, can be kind of pricey, but there's really no reason not to be. It's really core to what we do, and it should be core to what you do too. It's really awesome. And the data will set you free. This is just a quick tool we use. It's called UserSnap. We use this in one of our products. We just wanted a quick feedback tool. But what's really cool about it is someone who's using this this is our audience discovery data product. Someone's in here and sees something weird they don't like why am I seeing this article about Mustangs? This doesn't make sense to me. The cool thing about it is they can snap it, write a comment why whatever they're seeing doesn't make sense, and we have it integrated into Slack. So we have a dedicated Slack channel for feedback for the product, so the team instantly sees the feedback with a link to go see the details of whatever the person typed and the screenshot of whatever they excerpted and that sort of thing. So like little tools like this can be awesome. It's really not very expensive. And it's great feedback, and it just goes to the whole team. Which is the last point I guess I'll make on research, which is research is only as good as it's transparent and you've been able to operationalize it. In other words, you can have a ton of research sitting in a Google Drive folder, and that's great. You feel really good about it. But if the team can't use it, or there's no way to access it, it's useless. So that's a really important part of whatever your research plan is. Just figure out a way to make it available to your team so that it can be part of whatever process you have to do stuff. So Purvis, well, I'll go through this one really fast, but just the idea of everything we do is part of a process, it's part of an experience. So we try to think of user experiences not as a page or a set of pages, but instead what's kind of a life cycle I did a talk a while back on customer experience flows, which is a really cool idea. It's neat. They're fun to do, but this idea of what's the life cycle of this user from the moment they find out about you and the moment they come to your site all the way to being a lifelong member or a dedicated activist for your brand. What are those different touch points, and how does each thing you're working on contributing to that experience piece by piece, and each thing leads to the next? So this idea of being each thing is part of a whole. So for instance, they take an action and they get an email, and the email is a notification. The notification gives them an insight. The insight leads to an action, and the action leads to a benefit, and that leads you back to the beginning, and so on. So creating these experiences that guide people through your brand's experience. And impactful. This is a big one for us because our customers are the internet, which is hard. There's a ton of them. And so like figuring out how can we, by doing research and testing and that sort of thing, figure out what's the thing that we can do that's going to make the 10x impact, that's going to make the big effect. Because there's 1,000 things we can do. And this is actually one of the risks of research, is that you can get into a research rut. Like I'm optimizing this one button on this page, and I got a 1% and a 2% and a 5% and a 7% increase. And that's awesome, except you just took 3 weeks doing that. You could have spent getting a 50% increase on your funnel further up that would have had a much bigger impact on your KPIs. Like figuring out what's the right problem to solve and what's the thing that's going to give you the 10x impact is another kind of core idea for us. And then the last one is this idea of the slide not working. There we go, everywhere. Our tools are all over the world. They're in 70 languages. We got to those 70 languages by crowdsourcing the original translations. So we created a site, and these are the 35 strings in the interface. Hey, translate this into Romanian for us. Sure, thank you. And we had to fact check it a little bit, but generally speaking, it was a really fast way to get a lot of translation really quickly because it was a limited string set. So little tricks like that are kind of growth hacking things we've done. But this idea of when you're everywhere, you've got to think about mobile. You've got to think about accessibility. You've got to think about scalability and performance. Not just the fact that it's in different languages, but also how does it work on a really slow connection or a really small screen or a really large screen. It's not just like a phone versus desktop. There's like 1,000 different resolutions. How does your design or your product respond to those? And it's a really tricky problem. But if you build it into the beginning, if you build it into how you understand the product and the process, it's a lot easier than going back after the fact and saying, oh, crap, tablets. Rats. We didn't think about tablets. And so it's a lot easier if you kind of think about that up front. Right. Oh, and one other one I wanted to mention was performance and scale is really important too. So we do a lot of work with APIs, so programmatic access to our data, and doing stuff like performance. So when something gets loaded 4 billion times a day and you're paying for the CDN to load that asset, that gets really, really expensive really quickly. So we'll do crazy stuff, like the guys have done these amazing things where they'll take the 300 services like Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, all that stuff that we offer, and like figuring out what's the perfect pixel that organizes each of those with the smallest number of bytes possible so that we can use those and serve those up 4 billion times a day in a really performant way, which minimizes our cost and makes it faster for the customer. And so when you're at scale, you have to think about stuff like that, which is a really cool design and technology problem to solve. All right, so which brings me kind of the big kind of aha I had a little while back, because we talk a lot about this stuff, which is treating process like a product. So those are some of the things that are like really near and dear to us. Those are values that really haven't changed over the 8 years I've been working here. But all along the way, we're always kind of poking at how we work. Not just the product itself, but also how does seeding work? How does process work? What tools are we using to measure things, and how are they working? How are we collaborating together? We're about to move all of our seeding around. I'll talk about our teams here in a second. But it's really interesting when you start thinking about how you work as a product, and then iterating and retrospecting just like an agile team does on a product, but doing the same thing on how you work and not just the thing you make. It can have gigantic impacts on your company and your productivity as a team. And that's been a really big, it can be painful sometimes, but I think in the end you're better for having done it. And every once in a while just saying, well, is this working? We just went back to having no meeting Wednesdays. So no standing meetings allowed on Wednesdays. Trying to kill hour-long meetings, making them 30 minutes. They should have agendas and owners and outcomes and follow-ups and stupid little things, but they're huge because we spend a ton of time in meetings. And what if all that time was spent being awesome instead? It's huge. I mean, I was just thinking, I wish there was a tool that sat in the corner and figured out, okay, everyone's sitting in this room. This is how much it costs every minute for every person in this room to be sitting here. And have that number just like, the dollar amount going up. And I guarantee people would spend a lot less time talking if they saw that number going up that quickly because, hey, we're expensive, right? So, yeah, just things like that. So really thinking about how we work and iterating on that the same way we iterate on products is something that's really important to us. So speaking of which, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're organized and how we work. This came up a lot. A meetup or two ago, we were talking a bit about how teams collaborate and they're structured and stuff. So this is how we work. This is our own weird solution to combining agile and lean. And how many people have heard of Spotify's squads and guilds and such model? Yeah, so we took a bit of it. We didn't do the whole thing. I mean, they've got this whole tribes and I don't know what they're called, but basic idea. We took a few of the ideas and then kind of wove them into what we do. So this is kind of how we work. This is my team. We'll be 10 when I hire that senior graphic designer. Anybody, hit me up. That's this person. So right now we've got 10 people as myself. I have a creative director. I have a bunch of designers. And I have 2 guys on my team. This is a relatively new development. The growth team. They're a growth hacking team. There's 2 guys on my team. And they're basically, all they do is research testing and growth hacking strategies out to the teams. So the way it's structured is, my team is centralized. The idea being that because we work together and collaborate, we have weekly meetings to look at each other's work and talk about, this is kind of the guild, if you will. The idea is that way you keep identity, brand expression, product design consistent across all the products and marketing. So it's really important to have this cohesion. But that said, kind of following Spotify's model, 2 keyboards. Each of these designers are embedded in each of these teams. So we have 4 product teams, and those product teams are self-contained. So they have a product, they have dev, design, QA, and the idea is each of those teams has a set of business goals that they're kind of focused on. The concept is for there to be very little dependency between the teams, although it happens anyway. 3 of these teams work on the pub tools, things that most people know us for, the sharing tools and follow tools and stuff. A 4th team works on data products. They have Game of Thrones names. So Baelish, Targaryen, Martell, Targaryen, and Tyrell. And then we have a marketing organization. And the cool thing about the marketing organization is, 2 keyboards, that the creative director, Banaz, is Banaz here? I don't remember if she's here or not. And this senior graphic designer that we're looking for work really closely with the marketing organization to make sure that brand guidelines and identity are consistent between products and marketing across the organization. So all these teams sit with each other. So they're all co-located. So the designers are embedded in the team. They sit with the developers. They do stand-ups together. They collaborate together. And then we, as a group, get together, to tie all the loose ends. So that's kind of the process that we've found works really well for us. And then lastly, the growth team provides research, testing, and growth strategies out to each of the product teams and the marketing teams. So these teams might say, hey, we want to do an A/B test of a homepage messaging, and here's the 4 cells we want to test. The growth team takes it and says, great, we'll set that test up for you, we'll run it, we'll execute, here's what we learned. And the team will turn and say, okay, great, that's what we're going to do, and they'll do whatever they do with the results. But this is just so intrinsic to how we work that we wanted to make it a formalized team within our team. And we made that part of the user experience team, but mostly because my team serves all these teams, it made sense to have the growth team within my team. But that's just our own particular org structure. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about the team structure stuff? Yeah, sure. Where is Will? Will is here. Will is one of our growth guys. Yes, he is. He's awesome. He tons of time like interviewing our customers, like really getting into, and then digging into our funnel analytics and all the different A/B testing stuff. And those guys are awesome. So we're really, really excited. This is a relatively new development. They were doing some of this anyway. They were doing way too much stuff. We said, this is really, really important. So we pulled them over here to say, you guys are going to do this exclusively. And we're really excited. It's just getting underway, but already the results are pretty awesome. So, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. And also the growth team will usually be sitting in the planning sessions. And so they're talking even early in the planning stages to identify when they want to do testing. It'll be part of oftentimes it'll be part of a backlog. I haven't talked about tools yet. We use Fabricator. Some people use Jira. Some people use, they're all kind of sort of similar. But we have our own board for the growth team, kind of our backlog, if you will, for that team. And you can cross-link. So A/B test, so the growth team's doing an A/B test, it's in their board, but the squad that asked for the A/B test, it'll be in their backlog as well. That's a nice way to keep track of who's working on what at what time. Any other questions about, yeah, hey Claire.
So how do you ensure you keep your own list?
Yep.
And then developers keep their own list in Jira or whatever.
Mhm.
How do you ensure that your list gets addressed in those teams?
Great question. So everyone's using Fabricator, and the boards cross-link to each other. So there's a standing meeting where all the priorities for this business, the tools business, each week, where they keep the overall kind of priorities across the teams. And that way they can kind of keep track of, okay, well, what's working on what's going to get released, because we have to communicate outward and do blog posts and marketing and stuff like that. And that's kind of a way for them to prioritize across groups. Makes sense? Does that sound right? Yeah, cool. Any other questions? I'll fly forward. All right, excellent. So outcome of all that is all kinds of goodness, which is awesome. And I'll post these. I'm not sure how to post a Google Doc to SlideShare. I'll figure it out. Anyway, what's that? Yeah, right, huh? Excellent. I'll get some great SEO. Yay. So kind of process how we work. Okay, so the good old thing, agile and lean and all this sort of stuff. So here's how we work, and I'm not going to say it's pretty. So process. The main thing for us to figure out was the whole thing of going to the squads and the guilds, much like agile, was a developer thing. This is the thing the developer organization wanted to do. And so the question always to design is, okay, well, how do we apply ourselves to what is essentially a development process? And so what we've worked out is we really work 3 different ways. So typical thing, every 2 weeks, each team has sprint planning. They go to the backlog, they pull priorities out, they create a sprint in Fabricator. I'll get to tools in a second. And as a designer, there might be a very simple design task that needs to happen within that 2-week sprint. It's totally doable within that 2-week sprint. So there'll be some quick design, there might be some quick research, there'll be some design work, there'll be some building, they'll release it at the end of 2 weeks. Pretty easy, not a big deal, minor feature. Sometimes features require a little more effort than that. And so we'll take a sprint, we'll just do a design sprint. So we'll take a 2-week sprint and just do design. Maybe there's some additional research that needs to be done, or it's just kind of big-ish, and they want to have time with the developers to collaborate together and not have to worry about the 2-week sprint window. And so they'll just take a 2-week sprint and say, we're just gonna focus on the research and design of this. And then what happens is the following sprint, then the dev team picks it up and runs with it afterwards. And then sometimes we got to come out of we'll come out of the sprint process altogether and just say, this is a big gnarly problem. It's going to take time for us to do this research and do this exploration. We're saying, we're going to take this out of the sprint cycle completely. We're going to go work on this. We're going to do some research. We're going to collaborate. We're going to explore some different options, look at the market, et cetera, whatever. And then when that's done, bring it back and say, okay, now how do we bring this back into the sprint process, break this up into sprints, get it into the backlog into a way that we can then work on it. But sometimes you just got to say, look, this process was not designed for this. So right tool for the job, you just got to say, you know what, it's not the right tool for the job. Some of our audience discovery product came out of a process like this. When we did the premium version of our SaaS business, that came out of a process like this. It's just sometimes it's just necessary. Now the trick is, like any good design process, you still have to make sure that you're validating the ideas with users and that sort of thing. It's not just going off and designing a bunch of stuff and saying, here's the design, because you want to ultimately come back to an agile development process. But it can be powerful. And then every quarter, we're doing this tomorrow, we do hackathons, which is a fun process bit. So tomorrow morning, we're going to kick off a hackathon. We'll be here 24 hours doing fun engineering, design kind of things. And then we do those about once a quarter, once every 4 months. And that's mostly just fun, but some really great product ideas have come out of our hackathons. So that's a good time. Any questions about process stuff? I just blew through a lot of agile stuff really fast. Did I lose anybody? No? Good. All right, cool. Yeah, sure, shoot.
The plan to find design test build release in 2 weeks.
Mhm.
From a test perspective, how are you getting participants? Or is that a tool same later?
Wait, say it again,
How are
sorry.
you getting participants to test?
Great. Will, do you want to answer that one?
So basically what I do, what we use metrics. So we collect email addresses from everybody that signs up for our tools. This metrics captures those email addresses. And you can tie those email addresses to certain characteristics that are important to you. Like this is a new user. This is a user using this particular type of tool. And then I just send out a bunch of emails.
So you're going after existing customer base. So you're
Yeah,
using
yeah. Suppose that it's typically if it's like if it's homepage testing, usually we'll use usertesting.com.
And they recruit for you.
What?
User testing recruits for you.
Yeah.
Yep. We also have a kind of like a user group of longer term customers that we've talked to in time as well.
So like the end result of like having talking to all these users is eventually like I get kind of like build a relationship with them. And then, so then now I have like 30 people that I can just kind of reach out to at a time. And they're willing and they provide good feedback. So
Cool. Any other? Yeah, sure. Shoot.
In sort of like on my team, I'm in the red zone there.
The red zone.
Yeah. How much time in that 2-week sprint do you usually get for, like, probably for design and for testing? One of the things that we have is we tend to, one of the reasons why we're looking for UX researchers, we tend to like that falls to the bottom because the developers are ready and willing to just jump on developing something. So it gives us very little time in that 2-week sprint to just do our designs and kind of think them out. And we're now trying to look at like, wow, if we were to do user testing, we got like 12 hours in the sprint.
Mhm.
So how much time do you dedicate to the design and testing versus the rest of the?
So what I would say is typically what we do is we sort of do all of these things kind of in tandem. So like, I mean, obviously there needs to have to be some sort of design. You need to have some sort of like direction to go. But once that's built, usually testing and the development process kind of happens at the same time. As tweaks need to be made, it can be made easier. It's not like in production.
Yep. But most features that end up being completely self-contained within a 2-week sprint are going to have to be pretty simple and constrained.
Yeah.
If there's going to be a fair amount of testing, it's probably going to be a candidate for the sprint ahead thing, where because you need that extra time to run a test for 4 or 5 days to get significance. Yep. Any other process? Yeah, sure.
Well, from what I understand, what you described, you're using microservices.
Sorry?
You're using microservices.
Microservices.
Okay.
Are you talking about research tools or are you talking about like engineering? Yeah.
Because you don't have just the,
Sure. I'm probably the wrong person to ask about engineering. Yeah, about the engineering stack. Although if you're curious, grab my card, and I'm happy to have one of my engineers like follow up with you because they can answer the question probably better than I can. We do have a lot of the tools that I talked about are built in. So Kissmetrics is built into our product, and so we'll track that data pretty much every day. Is that? I'm not sure if that's what you're asking though.
not exactly, because I was trying to build a second question in terms of the US.
Mm-hmm. Well, in theory, right, sure, no. So I mean, in theory, the experience should be ambivalent to the tech, right? Whether this page was built in WordPress or this page was built in PHP, or like there's older parts of our site that are still PHP. There's our blog and the academy we just launched is WordPress. I mean, we have there's several different platforms that our stuff built on, but the user shouldn't see that. It should be a consistent experience across, regardless of what technology is underneath it. Well, ultimately me. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, and in fact, like we just kicked off. We started at last hackathon, and we're using this hackathon as like a little double springboard to update and pull together all of our product guidelines, brand identity guidelines, and all that sort of stuff. Because there's been so much development, and we want to kind of pull all that back in here as we're getting towards the end of the year. It's hard. Yeah. No, absolutely. We have this is going to get esoteric here. We have a framework called Attire, which basically is we've taken our style guidelines and made them interactive code snippets. So everyone uses the same button, and button is styled a certain way. So as long as you just say, I want a button here, it'll be styled correctly. And if we later decide we want buttons to be square instead of rounded, all the buttons change from square to rounded. It's about using. What's that? Yeah, I guess there's worse people to go after, I suppose. But yeah, but the idea is exactly that, right? When you have 4 product teams all developing what you want to be a cohesive experience, you have to put frameworks in place to maintain consistency across the. Yeah. Exactly. It's just all it's doing is saying take these snippets of CSS and code and make them repurposable and reusable in different contexts, containers, and so on. I don't think we haven't we haven't open sourced that. It's still kind of a work in progress. It'll be interesting. The idea is when we go through this whole style guide thing that we're working on, the idea is to then update Attire with all that stuff as well, so that it's easier to use. Right now, what ends up happening is it ends up being used in certain places, but not all of them, which kind of defeats the purpose then, because you've changed it you want to change it everywhere, and it changes like 3/4 of the places because you didn't use it everywhere. So that's what we're trying to get to. It's tricky when you've got 4 teams running really, really fast. It's hard to maintain that consistency. It's a great question. Hard problem. Any other questions? Very near to the end. All right, and then we can have more beer. Tools we use, this really quickly because we get asked, I get asked this sometimes, what tools we use. No, we don't use watercolors, although actually we could for hackathon. We use Adobe Creative Suite, although less than we used to. We use the cloud version, $50 a month gets you everything for Adobe. Although honestly, Sketch is awesome. Who does not use Sketch or never heard of Sketch? Only a couple, yeah. Check it out. It's freaking awesome, and it's inexpensive too. So at the end, I'm going to come to a question, which is the one everyone asks me, isn't really relevant to this directly, but like, how do I get into UX? Sketch is a great tool. It's about $100, so it's relatively cheap, certainly compared to $50 a month or thousands of dollars for other software. And it's a really cool tool, and so we love Sketch. So we do use Creative Suite. Mostly we use Sketch. Fabricator is kind of how we do all of our ticketing and stuff, but other people use other tools. It's just basically ticketing software. We use Trello for meeting notes, for meeting agendas, just because it's easy to move cards around as you go through meetings. And then Slack. Slack is freaking awesome. We use it, and we use Slack. We use Slack a lot of different ways. We have company-wide channels. We have, for instance, we have a closed channel that the UX team uses just to share work and crit each other's stuff, but no one but the UX team gets to see it. I mentioned before that feedback tool has its own Slack channel, so that everyone who submits feedback on our data product goes into that channel. It's incredible. Integrations in Slack are really, really cool. So if you haven't looked at it for your team, check it out, because it totally changed how we work and how we collaborate. You end up using a lot less email, which is good. Less email is good.
We also are using Slack. We put out these anomaly notifications on websites, and so if somebody adds a Slack integration to that anomaly, we have a channel that shows every single anomaly event that happens for every person that has it integrated. And so I'll use that a lot of times when I'm trying to do research on the anomalies, just to see like what do they actually look like in the wild, you know. And another thing we just started, me and some people started doing. There's like you could do like group chats.
Yeah.
So if I have a specific project that I'm working on with like a designer and a developer, we'll set up a group chat and just hash out feedback there.
Like Command-Shift-K, right?
Yeah.
I think it's Command-Shift-K. Yeah, it lets you do it like start a group chat, kind of like in Facebook Messenger. You can have a group conversation, same thing.
It's a kind of one-off.
Yeah, temporary channel. Yeah, it's pretty neat. Cool. And yeah, actually, before I get to this one, any questions about any of the tool at work stuff? Yeah. Go for it. InVision app, yeah, for prototyping and stuff. And we're also checking out, it's kind of for prototyping. There's a product called Principle, which partners really nicely with Sketch to do transitions. So if you're doing mobile work and you're doing like things that overlay and slide up and flip over and that sort of things, you can use Principle to do kind of prototypes with Sketch where they work really closely together, which is an awesome tool. We also had the guys here last month from Simply, and they have a plugin. So that's the cool thing about Sketch is that it's componentized. It's all these plugins, so you can plug things in and do diagrams. You can plug things in and do pretty much anything you want with it. Simply has a collaboration tool that plugs into Sketch to help developers and designers collaborate more closely. So they were here last month showing off their product, which is pretty cool. And great. So famous last question, because I get asked this so much. How do I get started in UX? So hey, I want to come work for others, or I want to come work for one of you. I'm relatively new in UX. Do we have any new UX people like just getting in? Yeah, awesome. So I get asked this question a lot, and the real question is, how do I get hired to do work if I don't have any work to show to get hired? Right? I mean, because there's lots of ways to get into UX. There's tons of resources online. There's courses online. There's places like General Assembly that have classes you can go and take and get some experience. One of the advice I'll tell folks is if you don't have stuff to show, because that's what we always look for. Like, I don't care where you went to college, really. I just want to see what you can do. Like, show me how awesome you are. So if you don't have a job to do it, go find a local nonprofit, church, the veterinarian, somebody who needs an app or needs a website to do something awesome. Take your favorite app that pisses you off and redesign it, and say, "Wow, this is Facebook really annoys me, but it could be beautiful and awesome if it looked like this," because it shows someone who's trying to hire you. This is how I think. This is how I take a problem and break it down and think through it and think what the user's trying to do and then solving the right problem for them and so on and so forth. So like creating those opportunities for yourself. You don't have to have a job to have work to show. But that's always kind of the tricky thing, right? Because I have to have work to show to get hired, but I don't get hired, so I need work to show. So yeah, sure.
One thing that a lot of people kind of miss out. They'll deliver this like finished product. This is the thing that I made, and something that's really powerful to people who are hiring is seeing that step by step. So having that
process,
having all of that work that led up to there can help you tell a really powerful story.
And if you haven't already checked, Dribbble is a fantastic community. Really, it's a great place to show work and get feedback and participate and offer feedback. And we put a bunch of our work out on just to kind of get it out there, and it's been really, really positive just to contribute to that community. And so definitely encourage you to check that out too. Okay, so that's it. Does anybody have? Usually at this point, you just say basically ask me anything. Does anybody have any questions at all that I'm happy to try to answer? Sure.
Like regarding hackathons, you guys get your product, or you guys try to find new product.
Yes and yes and yes. It can be anything. Generally, we suggest that it be a project that something to do with what we do here, which since we're on the internet, it's kind of everything. But it'll be anything from really esoteric, cool coding stuff, or like heavy duty engineering stuff, to the game room over there. That was a hackathon project. The quiet room in the back was a hackathon project. This used to be a garden thing that was a hackathon project. We'll do all kinds of different stuff. Tomorrow we're brewing beer and wine, I believe. I'm writing music for a video. Go figure. The CEO gives an award for the project that kind of aligns with the company's business. The CTO gives Awesome Cool Tech Award. I get to give a UX award for design and user experience. And then there's a popular vote for everyone's favorite project. One of my favorite ones was years ago. There was an event in China. It was like an uprising protest thing. And the Chinese government shut down the internet. And we could see in the data, so this guy's hackathon project was he dug into the data and actually watched the different social networks and their behavior during that event in China. Because we're all over the world, we could actually see all that happen. And he did this presentation looking at what happened and when things went down and came back and what people's reactions were. It was like taking a slice of a really serious event and kind of seeing, wow, it's, what's happening on the other side of the planet. It was pretty cool. So you never know what you're gonna get. It's gonna be crazy. Crazy fun, 24 hours, we'll be up all night. I think someone's gonna DJ. That'd be cool.
Is that happening?
I think he might, I don't know, I'm putting you on the spot. Are you gonna DJ, Jonathan? Okay, no pressure. It's only on the internet. Any other questions I can answer? Yeah, shoot.
So earlier you mentioned data informed design, right?
Mm-hmm.
You talked about the black box and it increased engagement and all the numbers went up and to the right.
Yep.
But we didn't do that because it was on-prem.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the questions that I have is in taking that to other business stakeholders.
Yep.
How do you have that conversation, right? Where it's like we have proof that the numbers do this, but we're not going to do that, and here is why. How does that conversation unfold within your organization?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to build the relationships, and that's like at the beginning I was talking a little about design leadership. I've reported to a bunch of different parts of ClearSpring used to be ClearSpring, now I had this organization, but a lot of it is just, I meet with the CEO, I meet with the different executives. You just have to have that. You have to be able to have a conversation like what's important to us, and what's worth the trade-off. There's sometimes when you're there, you're going to decide you're going to end up doing the thing that maybe isn't like the most user-centered thing. And we've learned the hard way. We've done that a few times where, hey, this is a great opportunity. The data tells us this is going to be great. And we went down that road and we did the thing that we wanted to do instead of what the user wanted to do. And yeah, it bit us in the ass. And you have to, now we wouldn't have known that if we hadn't done the testing and research as well. So I mean, it's a big feedback loop. But I think what we've learned over the years is that when we do right by publishers, people that put us on their pages, where we end up doing right by their customers, which are people coming to their site. And that's usually a pretty good true north for us. And we've proven a lot of time over and over again that works. In the long run, that works best. And that helps you have conversations like that, where, yeah, there could be a short-term win, but it's not worth the long-term cost. Yeah.
So have you ever found yourself in the position of doing research on users and knowing too much? Like there's something that you discovered about them that you're like, oh, I should know that.
No. We're not. I don't think we're really diving into things we should know. Things like what makes you successful.
Yeah. We filter out all those views.
So I found myself in that position where
Yeah.
I was doing research on candy companies that bizarrely went to all their competitors and got their analytics. I just typed in URLs. And then my boss's response was like, you can't do that. So that being sort of like I knew too much about the industry. Specifically in this case, that they were mostly about brands, but all their users were really interested in the gaming section. So that was the majority of their user.
Yeah. Most marketing teams are going to tell you, or whether they'll tell you or not, that they're doing competitive research. I mean, everyone wants to better understand who they're competing against. I mean, for us personally, a lot of the time we're in the position where we take our publishers' data very seriously. We're not, because we're in advertising technology, for instance. I am not going to let, this is an awful example of brands, but I'm not going to let Sears target JCPenney people and vice versa, because that's not ethical. And so you have to make decisions like that as a business, that this is what's important to us and what's important to our customers.
Another example of this, so
Sure.
at one point, Target knew so much about its consumers that it was sending ads to them, and one was for basically pregnancy-related stuff. My father got it.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. Yeah.
Basically that story.
Sure. Yeah, we have a guy in our team who's our head of product, Rich Labarca, and he participates in all the talks with NAI, these different privacy organizations, all the do not track conversation, all that stuff, because we're all over the internet. That's really important to us, and we've tried to be really proactively part of that conversation, because at the end of the day, we're open internet people. We're a lot more like Google than like Facebook, and that the internet wins, and that ultimately we do better in business if we do right by our customers and they allow them to do right by their customers. But yeah, those kinds of questions, I mean, yeah, they're really interesting ethical questions. I used to be back at AOL, I used to work in AOL search. And a bunch of researchers at AOL got into trouble because they said, well, hey, we've got all this amazing search data. Let's make it available to researchers. And they had the best intentions at heart. I mean, it was, hey, this is us helping the world do research. And it turned out that people like search personal names in searches, and there was personal information located in the search data that they released, and they got in big trouble. This was years ago. Those are very real. Anytime you're in internet business, in advertising tech, marketing tech, any of these technology businesses, you have to wrangle with really interesting ethical problems like that. And for us, we've always focused on trying to be on the right side of the privacy regulations and on top of like the latest EU guidelines and all that sort of stuff. It's really important. What else? Yes.
So kind of related to that, but
Mm-hmm.
where does security come in? Do you have a separate group? Do your developers know about security?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and it's handling I would say our platform and operations teams. But it's a huge part of what we do. It has to be because we're such a large network. Yep. Yeah.
So I love the concept of having growth hackers on your team. I think
Yeah.
it's really cool. And like, I have an intern who works for my team, and I actually have for half of her time she's been researching best practices.
Mhm.
We're government, so we're always trying to like figure out how to be a lot more innovative like industry.
Sure.
So I was just wondering, right? Let's say that she's a growth hacker. I'm trying to help the rest of my team also have the mindset that we're always trying to improve.
Mhm.
I was wondering, right? You got these two people. What about the rest of your team? Do you do anything in particular to encourage them to always be like looking at better practices and do their own like growth hacking and what they do? Then always reading blogs and writing blogs, kind of connecting with other industry and stuff. So I was just wondering how that affects you in your culture.
Yep. I think it's. I mean, I can't speak for everyone.
It's like,
yeah.
it's sort of like we look for a certain caliber of people in the people that we hire to where they're just going to do these things naturally.
Yeah, it's really kind of built in.
Yeah.
And
Slack's a great avenue for that.
Sure.
I mean, I learned so much just by reading stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. We had a meeting this morning as a weekly product thing, and our engineers presented. These are features we released a week or so ago, and the engineers said, "This is what we released. This is what it was intended to do. This is what we were measuring. Here are the charts to show how it's performed since. It was a 33% increase, blah 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 over blah blah blah." And these are engineers basically reporting on the performance of the features. And so, if you build that in and make that part of the process, these guys then are a resource to help you do it. But if everyone thinks that way, it's kind of the same way with when you build user experience into the whole organization. I've had engineers call me on like usability. It's like, well, I don't know, is that the right usable way to do that? And every once in a while they'll like catch you like, oh, damn, he's right. Yeah, shoot, I didn't think about that. That's great. That's fantastic. When an engineer comes to you and says, hey, I have a question about this design, and sure, you might go back and say, well, here's reason A, B, and C why I did it this way, but still, that's awesome to have engineers actually passionate about usability and user experience. Is fantastic. That's what you want. That. Yeah, sure.
This is a little bit of a tangent, but what are the most sort of interesting tests or uncommon findings you've seen related to social sharing, increasing social sharing?
Interesting finding. We got to watch MySpace die.
Salience is really important.
Yeah.
So, like, the main product that most people know for are sharing buttons.
Mhm.
If you have tiny sharing buttons, people won't share much. If you have bigger sharing buttons, they'll share more. If you have sharing buttons that are always with you as you use the page, they'll share even more. So that's a pretty consistent finding.
Our tools have.
Pretty easy to.
Yeah. I mean, our tools will let us measure things like, do people scroll? Yeah, they do. And things like that. So we can see a lot about how people interact with the page and what pages they interact with and what kinds of content they interact with. And it is really interesting. You'll see a lot of individual differences within verticals and even just between sites. It just depends on how they've constructed their site and how they use ads and how they use different kinds of plugins and stuff like that. But it's interesting. Yeah.
So you seem to be a very UX-driven organization.
Mhm.
I'm in an enterprise application company. We get trade lists, kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We don't have designers. Kind of behind the times there.
Mhm.
Getting killed on usability. So this is a very broad question. Where do you start there?
I'd start with research.
Yeah.
Figure out put the stuff in front of people that are actually using it and see what the problems are. They're usually paid beyond this. They're basically when people are like they get confused, they don't know where to go. Find those problems and then come up with solutions.
My last company, and UX started because enough high-profile clients got the attention of the CEO that said your data is awesome, but your experience sucks, so we're leaving you for other clients.
Mhm.
Like that should be enough.
Yeah.
Right. Like you need to
Yeah.
find an advocate